Let's dive right into this explainer. Today we're unpacking this just incredible psychological character study of ancient history's most famous giant slayer. We all kind of have this tendency to think our absolute greatest threats are external, right? The visible enemies, the towering obstacles, the forces that are actively trying to tear us down. But history, and honestly human psychology, they tell a very different and far more sobering story. We're looking at a man whose most devastating battles were actually fought entirely within the quiet, unseen theater of his own mind. We are talking, of course, about King David. By analyzing his life through this lens of profound psychological and historical reflection, we really uncover a blueprint of human vulnerability. And it's a blueprint that is just as relevant to us today as it was thousands of years ago.
Now, our protagonist's story doesn't begin with royal lineages or marble floors or being wrapped up in fine linens. He's grounded here, not as a born royal, but as a forgotten, dusty shepherd boy. His hardest, most defining lessons were learned in absolute, isolating obscurity. Long before anyone even knew his name, before he ever commanded an army or sat in a palace, he was just the youngest brother, left out in the rugged hills of Bethlehem. It was out there in the dirt that he learned to literally listen to the fear of the animals well before he could even see the danger lurking in the shadows. He learned that genuine courage isn't just this magical absence of fear. No, it's the raw determination to press forward simply because others are depending on you.
And so that leads us to the absolute core mystery of this explainer today. What happens when the man who survives the lethal, unforgiving wilderness is ultimately dismantled by the soft comforts of the palace? We all tend to think that reaching the top, achieving the goal, getting the title, we think that's the finish line. We think it's the happily ever after. But we're going to explore a fascinating kind of inverted hero's journey today. Because for King David, finally getting the crown isn't the triumphant end of his story. The absolute height of his success is, tragically, the precise beginning of his downfall. It's just a stark warning about what happens when the fight for survival stops and the challenge of managing immense power begins.
Section 1. Formed in the shadows. So, tracing the trajectory of his early life, his rise to power was anything but a straight, predictable line to the top. It's incredibly easy to assume that once someone steps into their calling or achieves this massive victory, that the path just clears for them. But for David, after defeating a giant, he didn't get a lifetime of peace? No way. Instead, the song celebrating his victory sparked a lethal, paranoid envy in his mentor, King Saul. Imagine the extreme psychological whiplash here. The very hands David used to play calming music to soothe the king's mind were suddenly forced into action just to dodge spears being thrown at his head. He went overnight from a celebrated national hero to a relentlessly hunted fugitive. And he learned the bitter, terrifying truth that innocence and loyalty, they don't always protect a person from the irrational hatred of others.
Which brings us to a core psychological conflict that pretty much defined his entire existence. The profound contrast of his environments. On the left side of this dynamic, we have the desperate reality of the cave. The physical danger, the cold stone, the constant threat of death. These things actually built his unshakable character. In the total darkness of those caves, he learned utter dependence. He learned to speak to God not under these open, victorious skies, but from the depths of an imprisoned, desperate soul. But then on the right side, we have the palace. The soft silk, the endless abundance, and the safety. And that safety would later act as a slow anesthetic to his conscience. The scarcity of the cave taught him desperate restraint, while the absolute authority of the palace basically bred a quiet, deadly entitlement.
The immense willpower forged in that wilderness is just profound. While hiding deep in a cave, David suddenly found himself standing over his sleeping oppressor, King Saul, with a sword right in his hand. He had the perfect opportunity to end his own suffering in a single strike, yet agonizingly, he chose to hold back. He refused to kill Saul because he learned a lesson that, honestly, most leaders never grasp. You cannot build a righteous, lasting future by destroying things with your own impatient, vindictive hands. He recognized that a pursued, terrified man can easily become cruel and hard. He realized in that dark cave that he didn't just need deliverance from Saul's army, he desperately needed to be delivered from his own dark impulses and the overwhelming temptation to just seize control.
Section 2. The Perils of the Palace.
One single decision changed absolutely everything. The text points out that this immense moral failure didn't begin with a massive, dramatic leap off a moral cliff. It actually began on a day when kings normally went out to war. But David made this seemingly tiny, insignificant decision to just stay home. He stayed in the plush comfort of Jerusalem instead of going out to battle alongside his men. It was basically the snooze button of moral failure. It was a skip duty. An afternoon of feeling like, hey, he had earned a break from the struggle. It wasn't an explosion of evil, it was just a door left slightly open in his heart. And honestly, that is exactly how moral collapse usually starts, not with a roar, but with a quiet, entitled sigh of relief. He fell victim to a devastating psychological trap here: complacency. The source material really highlights this insidious illusion as his fatal error. He falsely believed that simply remembering his days as a weeping fugitive in the desert, remembering the cold caves and the gnawing hunger, that those memories would automatically protect his soul from the slow, silent poison of pride and abundance. He actually thought he was permanently immune to corruption purely because of the immense suffering he had survived. But the danger lurking in the palace, it doesn't bang loudly on the door like enemy soldiers rushing a battlefield. No, it sneaks in quietly, wearing velvet, and it simply waits for your heart to get entirely too used to being obeyed. Comfort is a far more effective assassin of character than hardship ever could be.
Think deeply about the gravity of this paradox for a second. When a man has nothing, he learns to cry out. But when he has everything, he must learn to tremble. Comfort and absolute authority are often far deadlier to the human soul than poverty and relentless persecution ever are. The abundance of the palace tested David in a terrifying way that the scarcity of the desert never, ever could. It revealed a really hard truth for anyone who achieves their goals, and that is, you need an even deeper, more profound grace not to fall completely asleep when your table is full, your enemies are vanquished, and absolutely everyone around you is telling you exactly what you want to hear.
Section 3. Anatomy of a Fall.
So let's trace this terrifying progression step by step, because as we know, no one falls from grace all at once. Step 1 is complacency, that small, seemingly harmless rest day away from the battlefield. Well, that idle time snowballs instantly into step 2, unchecked desire. He sees Bathsheba, and instead of acting like the humble, disciplined shepherd he once was, he acts like a fully entitled king who can just take whatever he wants. Step 3 escalates this into a massive abuse of power. It wasn't merely a lingering look, it was a royal command that literally could not be refused. And finally, step 4 is where the darkness just fully takes over, the cover-up. When paralyzing fear replaced his initial desire, he tried to hide his shame by orchestrating a breathtakingly cold betrayal. He didn't just have Uriah killed. He made this innocent, fiercely loyal soldier carry his very own death warrant back to the front lines.
Uriah's pure, unwavering loyalty just starkly contrasts with David's deep, sudden corruption. And after Uriah's death came the heavy, suffocating silence of the cover-up. I mean, what does it actually do to a human mind to hold a dark, murderous secret while thousands of people are cheering for you in the streets? Even though David kept his dark actions hidden from the public eye, his internal life morphed into a torturous, agonizing prison. You can maintain a completely flawless outward image. You can continue to govern, you can eat at royal tables and smile for the crowds, all while your character is entirely rotting from the inside out. His soul was drying up like a cracked desert, just desperate for the water of truth.
And then, the tension finally breaks with this incredible confrontation. Imagine the sheer suspense of this moment. Nathan the prophet walks into the grand throne room, literally risking his own life to tell a piercing parable about a rich man stealing a poor man's only lamb. And he's speaking directly to a king who has just proven he is more than willing to commit murder to protect his reputation. When the king expresses absolute outrage at the rich man in the story, Nathan just looks him dead in the eye and delivers the devastating punchline, "You are that man." In that suspended moment, the royal mask shatters. David experiences the crushing realization that he couldn't just brush his actions off as a mere weakness or an understandable mistake. It was a horrific, willful rebellion, and ultimately a direct sin against his own conscience and God. Section 4. The Bitter Harvest.
Here we learn the incredibly painful reality that while mercy can beautifully cleanse the soul, it absolutely does not instantly erase the destructive seeds we've already sown in the real world. David's unaddressed family dysfunction rapidly cascaded into a full-blown national catastrophe. His son Absalom didn't attack the city walls with swords and shields at first. No, he spent years attacking the people's trust with soft, manipulative, empathetic words at the city gates. The tragic consequences of David's moral failure ultimately forced the king to flee his own beloved city of Jerusalem, completely barefoot, his head covered, weeping openly. Just contrast the young, vibrant David who once fled from Saul with a heart full of promise to this old, broken David fleeing his own son, burdened by the crushing weight of his own ancient guilt.
When we closely contrast his battles side by side, a profound and really sobering realization emerges. Defeating a towering, terrifying giant like Goliath with a simple sling and a stone, that was actually easy compared to the agonizing, nearly impossible war against his own internal enemies. You can easily see an enemy across a battlefield, right? You can study their armor, you can predict their movements, but you cannot always see the complacency and pride silently taking root in your own heart. His external enemies unified his kingdom, tested his resolve, and brought out his greatest courage. But his internal enemies, they deeply divided his kingdom, shattered his family, and brought out a devastating, irreversible weakness.
Let's move forward and see how this builds to the emotional climax of his entire life. When the massive rebellion was finally crushed, David the king was completely eclipsed by David the father. He had explicitly ordered his commanders to be gentle with his rebellious son. But when the dust settled and the news arrived that Absalom was dead, it broke David in a way no foreign army ever could. This agonizing, repeated cry taps into the profound, universal pain of parenthood and blinding regret. It reveals the ultimate, unrecoverable cost of his earlier moral failures. Managing to win back his throne and his kingdom meant losing the very son he deeply, desperately loved.
Section 5. A Legacy of Mercy.
At the very end of his life, his hands trembled, his strength was gone, and he could no longer fight like the giant slayer of his youth. But his philosophical reflection on his journey is just staggering. He realized that his ultimate legacy wouldn't be built on a flawless record of military victories, or the beautiful psalms he wrote, or even the massive stone walls of Jerusalem he helped fortify. Instead, his truest legacy was built on the stunningly humble acknowledgement that he was, at his core, just dust. He was dust that miraculously received breath, dust that sang incredible songs, dust that sinned horribly, and dust that was kept alive entirely by an ocean of divine compassion. He fully embraced that he was a fragile mix of profound, devastating failures and redeeming mercy.
So I want to leave you with a final, lingering thought to close out our explainer today. We spend so much of our lives desperately trying to build our palaces, trying to insulate ourselves from pain, and trying to project a flawless image to the rest of the world. But true greatness isn't found in a perfect track record, or in pretending you never fall down. True greatness is having the raw vulnerability to let your darkest, most shameful moments completely break your pride, so they can teach you how to finally rely on something far greater than your own strength. Think about your own caves and your own palaces. How are you handling the quiet moments of comfort? Keep that in mind as you reflect on this incredible character study. Thank you for joining me.